Chapter 2. Dr. Dan. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop, and the boys," said Dr. Dan as they entered his office. "How nice to—" His eyes widened. "Good heavens, Stanley! Mr. Lambchop, you really must do something about that bulletin board." "It is still firmly in place, Dr. Dan," Mrs. Lambchop said. "We are at a loss to account for this attack of flatness." Dr. Dan thought for a moment. "Is there perhaps a family history of flatness?" "No," Mr. Lambchop said. "We'd remember that." "We got dressed for school," Stanley explained. "We didn't even have breakfast. And all of a sudden, I got flat." Dr. Dan frowned. "Nothing happened? Nothing at all?" "Well, Arthur hit me with a tennis ball," Stanley said. "And then I banged my shoulder on—" "Aha!" Jumping up, Dr. Dan took a large book from the case behind his desk and began turning pages. "This is Dr. Franz Gemeister's excellent, difficult, and peculiar cases. Just let me find— Here it is. Flatness, page 217. He read aloud. "Sudden flatness, extremely rare, minimal documentation, hearsay reports." Ah, here it is. Dates back to the 5th century. During battle, Mongo the Fierce, an aide to Attila the Hun, was struck twice simultaneously from behind and at once became no thicker than his shield. He became known as Mongo the Plate and lived to an old age without regaining his original girth. Dr. Dan closed the book. "As I suspected, the OBP." "Beg pardon," said Mrs. Lambchop. "The OBP. Osteal balance point," Dr. Dan explained. "A little-known anatomical feature. The human body, of course, is a complex miracle. Its skeleton, a delicate framework of supports and balances. The osteal balance point may occur almost anywhere in the upper torso. It is vulnerable only to the application of simultaneous pressures at 2 points which vary depending on the age and particular design, let us say, of the individual involved. In my opinion, the pressure created by the tennis ball and the shelf corner affected Stanley's OBP, thereby turning him flat." For a moment, everyone was silent. "The first time Stanley went flat, you were greatly puzzled by his condition," Mr. Lambchop said at last. "Now you seem remarkably well informed." "I read up on it," said Dr. Dan. Mrs. Lambchop sighed. "Perhaps we should seek a second opinion. Who is the world's leading authority on the OBP?" "That would be me," said Dr. Dan. "I see. Well, we've taken enough of your time." Mr. Lambchop rose, motioning his family to follow. "Thank you, Dr. Dan." At the door, Mrs. Lambchop turned. "Perhaps if we found the OBP, we could make Stanley—" No, said Dr. Dan. "It would be dangerous to put the lad through such a skeletal strain again. And finding the OBP, not very likely, I'm afraid." Arthur had an idea. "I know. If we all got sticks and hit Stanley all over at the same time and kept doing it, then—" "That will do, Arthur," said Mr. Lambchop. And he let his family out.